I still keep the hours. That's the part I can't explain to people. I don't work nights anymore, haven't in 3 years, but my body wakes up at 10:45 every night like a clock somebody else wound, and it stays awake until a little after 4, and then it lets me sleep. My ex-wife used to say I had no internal rhythm at all, that I could sleep through a fire. That's not true anymore. Something gave me one. I just wish it had given me a different one. I want to tell this the way it happened, in order, because the order matters more than anything. If I tell you the end first, you'll think it's a ghost story, and it isn't, not the way you mean. A ghost story has a dead person in it who wants something. What I'm describing didn't want anything from me at all. That was the worst part. It had no use for me except as a hand that could write a name. Let me back up. In the spring of the year, my life came apart. I took a job as the overnight desk clerk at a motel called the Larkspur Motor Lodge. It sat on a state highway in the middle of Kansas, the kind of road that used to matter before the interstate went in 40 miles north and took all the traffic with it. There was a town nearby, if you can call it that, a grain elevator, a Casey's, a Methodist church, a school that had consolidated with 2 other towns, so the building just sat there with the windows papered over. The Larkspur survived on people who were lost, people who were cheap, and truckers who didn't want to pay interstate prices. 29 units in an L shape around a parking lot, a sign out front with a neon flower that only lit the petals, never the stem, so at night it looked like a hand reaching up out of the ground. I'd lost my job at a tool and die shop when it closed, and I'd lost the house in the divorce, and I'd moved into a single wide my cousin let me have for almost nothing. I was 38 and I had no money and no people, and I took the night shift on purpose. Days people come up to a desk and they look at you, and they can tell. They can always tell when a man's been hollowed out. Nights, the only people who come in are too tired or too drunk or too far gone to look at you at all. I wanted to be a function instead of a person for a while. Hand them a key, take their card, point at the ice machine, nobody's eyes on me. The owner was a man named Roy Tesler. He was somewhere in his 70s, thin in the way that old farmers get thin, all tendon, and he ran the place with his sister-in-law Pat, who did the books and the rooms during the day. Roy hired me in about 4 minutes. He didn't ask why I wanted nights. He didn't ask much of anything. He showed me the register, the key rack, the credit card machine, the little office with the space heater and the coffee maker, and then he walked me through what he called the close. The close was a checklist. Lock the vending alcove at 1. Turn the sign to no at 2 unless we were under half full. Count the drawer, and at the bottom of the laminated card, in Roy's own marker, it said, confirm 28 occupied before 12. If 28 is open, see card and drawer. I asked him about it. It was the one thing on the list that wasn't obvious. Everything else was just running a motel. This was something else. He didn't pause, he said, 28's a long term. Fellas paid up through about the end of time. You don't have to clean it. You don't have to bother it. You just make sure the book shows it occupied every night before midnight. That's all. It's the easiest room in the place. I asked, so I never see this guy, and Roy said you might hear his ice machine. He likes his ice. Then he laughed a dry little laugh and moved on, and I let him, because I'd just been handed a job and a paycheck, and I wasn't going to make trouble over a paperwork quirk on my first night. The card in the drawer was a single index card, soft and gray from handling, the corners gone round. It sat in the cash drawer under the till tray, and it said in handwriting that wasn't Roy's, Room 28 is always occupied. Before midnight, write the guest into the book. Guest's name is the name already on the prior card. Do not leave 28 vacant overnight. If you forget, do not try to fix it after midnight. Call Roy. Do not go to the room, and under that, smaller, added later by a different hand. It is not a person. Don't talk to it like a person. I read that card maybe 4 times and decided it was a joke. Old motel, old owner, some inside thing passed down to mess with the new guy. There's a tradition of that, hazing the night man. So at 11:40 I opened the register to find the name I was supposed to copy. The book was a real book, a hardbound ledger, because Roy didn't trust the computer for the permanent record. Every guest got entered by hand, and there on every single page going back as far as I flipped weeks then months, room 28 had a guest, same room, every night, never blank. The name was written in a dozen different hands, every clerk putting it down their own way, but it was always the same name, L. Maddox. Sometimes L. Maddox, sometimes Leland Maddox, once or twice just Maddox. L checked in, never checked out every night for as long as the book went back. I flipped to the very front, and the first page was dated 9 years before I was born, and there, in faded blue ink, in a careful old-fashioned cursive, was the line, Erm 28, L. Maddox. I copied the name, and here's the first thing I should have stopped on. The thing I've turned over 1,000 times since. I wrote it with the office pen, a cheap stick pen on a beaded chain. And as I wrote the rest of the page, the truckers, the one couple, The pen ran smooth the way a pen does. But on Maddox, on those 7 letters, it caught, scratched, dragged like the ballpoint had gone dry, like the paper underneath had a grain to it the rest of the page didn't have. I shook the pen, figured it for a clog, finished the name, and the next line ran smooth again. I thought nothing of it. A pen catches. Everybody's had a pen catch. But it caught on his name every night after that, and only on his name. And the night I finally held the page up to the light and looked at it sideways, I saw why. There was already an indentation in the paper where his name went. A faint pressure line, the shape of the letters, pressed into the page before I'd touched my pen to it. I was writing into a groove that was already there. My hand was just filling in what something had already pressed down. The carbon copies were worse, but I'll get to those. Nothing else happened for almost 3 weeks. The job settled into me. I'd come in at 10, relieve a day girl named Brandy who barely looked up from her phone, count the drawer, and sit in the quiet with the space heater ticking. Cars on the highway got rarer as the night went. Around midnight, the world out past the lot would go completely still. Just the hum of the ice machine and the buzz of the sodium light over the office door. That orange light that makes everybody's skin look dead. I'd write L. Maddox into the book before 12 out of habit. The way you lock a door without thinking, the pen catching on his name like a stutter, and I'd watch the little TVs. I should explain the cameras because they matter. The Larkspur had a security system Roy had put in sometime in the late 80s and never updated. 4 cameras, the office, the parking lot, the ice and vending alcove, the back walkway, feeding into a bank of 3 small monitors and a VHS recorder that taped over itself every 24 hours. Black and white, the image swimming and rolling if you looked too long. There was no camera on room 28 directly. The lot camera caught the doors of 24 through 29 at the far end, at an angle, and 28's door was mostly hidden behind the ice machine housing. The first thing I couldn't explain happened on a Tuesday in my 3rd week. Slow night, 3 rooms rented, and a little after midnight I was watching the lot monitor without really watching it, and I saw the light come on in room 28. I'd never seen a light in 28. The window was always dark. But there it was, a warm yellow line under the curtain, and a shape moving across it, the unmistakable shadow of a person crossing from one side of the room to the other. And right then the office got cold. Not a draft. The space heater was running 2 feet from me, ticking away. But the air around the desk dropped, the way a basement is cold, the way the inside of a freezer is cold when you open it. My coffee, half a cup, went cool enough that I noticed it on my lip. I sat there with the heater roaring at my shins and my breath not quite fogging, and the light burning under the curtain of a room I'd been told was the easiest in the place. My first thought wasn't fear. It was that Maddox was real, an actual long-term tenant, an old man maybe who kept to himself, and the whole thing on the card was somebody's idea of funny. I even thought about walking down with a fresh roll of towels, just to put a face to the name. I was busy with a check-in, a tired woman with 2 kids in a minivan, and by the time I got her settled, the light in 28 was off again, and the office was warm. Here's the detail to hold on to. When I'd seen the light, I'd glanced at the recorder and seen the red light on taping. So the next morning, before Brandy came in, I rewound the tape. I wanted to see the old man's silhouette. I wanted to confirm he was just a man. The tape showed 28's window for that whole stretch around midnight. The window was dark, no light, no shadow. The curtain didn't move. I watched it 3 times, matching the time code, and there was nothing. Just a dark window in the ice machine and the orange lot. I'd watched it live and seen the light. The tape, recording the same camera at the same moment, showed nothing. I told myself I'd been tired. Headlights swinging across the glass, my eyes making patterns at 1 in the morning the way eyes do. I had a reasonable explanation for everything if I was willing to call myself unreliable, and that year I was very willing, so I let it go. The next thing that pulled me back was ice. Roy had said it, he likes his ice. I started noticing that the machine in the alcove between 27 and 28 ran every night around the same time, late after 1, when nobody was checking in. It would kick on with that grinding shutter and run its cycle and drop a load into the bin, and I'd hear it from the office because the night was that quiet. That on its own is nothing. Ice machines cycle to keep the bin full. But the bin was always emptier in the morning than it should have been. Scooped down low like a whole party had come through, on nights when those far rooms sat dark and empty, and there was a smell that came with it. The one time I walked down to the alcove late, around 1:30 to refill the office ice caddy, the air around the machine didn't smell like a motel. It smelled like wet receipt paper. That exact sour chemical smell of a thermal receipt left in the rain, paper, and cold metal, and something underneath it I couldn't name. I scooped my bags fast, and I didn't go back down at that hour again. I told Brandy about the bin once, and she said the machine probably had a leak. melting overnight, reasonable. Everything at the Larkspur always had a reasonable answer, ready and waiting, just a little too quick. I started asking about room 28, not dramatically, just casually the way you'd ask anything. I asked Brandy first, near the end of her shift, daylight still in the windows. I said, "Hey, who's the long-term in 28? You ever see him?" She didn't even look up. "Roy handles 28. You don't have to worry about it." And that was fine and friendly enough, and I let it sit. But a few weeks later, I asked her something I shouldn't have, and I asked it late. She'd stayed past her shift waiting on a ride, and it was already dark, already past 9. I said, "What's his deal, this Maddox?" And this time, before she answered, she looked at the clock on the office wall. A small glance, quick, but I caught it. She checked the time before she'd answer me. Then she said, "Quieter, room numbers are fine, names are different after dark. Just write the number, write the name, don't say it out loud once the sign's lit." She picked up her bag and went to wait outside for her ride, even though it was cold, and she didn't say it like she was scared of me. She said it like somebody had taught her a long time ago, the same way you teach a kid to look both ways. Like the fear was so old in her it had stopped being fear and turned into just how things were done. Pat was warmer about it. Pat brought me cookies sometimes. But when I asked her, doing rooms one afternoon, and I said the name Maddox, her hand stopped on the towel cart, just for a second. And I noticed something I hadn't before. On her ring of master keys, the key tag 28 was the only one wrapped in a twist of electrical tape, fat and clumsy, like she'd built up a little handle of it, so she'd never have to let bare metal touch her palm. She caught me looking, and she tucked the ring into her apron, and she said, "That's one of Roy's arrangements, honey. He's had it forever. It's the easiest part of your night." And she patted my arm, and that was the end of it. The easiest part of your night. All three of them, almost the same words. You don't worry about it. Roy handles it. Like the whole place shared one answer whose only job was to make you feel taken care of so you'd stop asking. And it half worked on me. But the job's only mystery was 28, and I couldn't stop circling it the way a tongue circles a bat tooth. Now the carbon copies, I said I'd get to them. Roy ran the registration on 3-part carbonless forms. The kind where you write on the top sheet and it presses through to 2 copies underneath. White, yellow, pink. Top copy for the file, yellow for the drawer, pink for the guest. For 28, since there was never a real guest to hand a pink slip to, the procedure was just to fill out the top and file all 3 together in the 28 folder, which by my time was 4 inches thick with years of identical slips. One night slow, I filled out 28 slip the way I always did. Pressed hard, the way you have to with carbonless, to make it take on all 3 layers. And when I peeled the sheets apart to file them, the top copy said what I'd written, L. Maddox paid long term. But the yellow copy underneath, the pressure copy, the one that only shows what your pen pushed through, had something more on it. Below my line, in the carbon blue ghost ink that those forms make, was a second line I had not written. Same name, L. Maddox. But in that careful old cursive from the front of the ledger, the 1961 hand, pressed clean through to the second sheet, as if someone had been writing on a 4th copy underneath mine at the same time. Harder than me. From below I checked the pink copy, blank where that line would be, only the yellow, only the pressure copy, as if my pen pressing down had woken up another pen pressing up. I sat with that one a long time. I didn't have a reasonable answer ready for it, and that frightened me more than the thing itself, because I'd come to depend on having a reasonable answer. I filed it. I didn't tell Roy. I think part of me already understood that telling Roy would only get me the same warm, smooth, prepared nothing everyone else gave, and I didn't want to hear the nothing anymore. The thing that broke it all open happened about 2 months in, on the one night I forgot. It was a bad night for me. My ex had called that afternoon, the first time we'd talked in months, about last paperwork on the house, and she'd been kind, which was worse than if she'd been cruel. I sat through the whole shift under that orange light, feeling the full size of what my life had become. The time went by, and when I finally looked at the clock, it was 12:40, and the page for that night had every room I'd rented written down, and the line for 28 was blank. The card came back to me. If you forget, do not try to fix it after midnight. Call Roy, do not go to the room. My first instinct was just to write it in, backdate it, who cares? But my hand stopped over the page, and I noticed the page itself, the 28 line. The paper there had gone soft, damp feeling, swollen, the way a paperback gets if it's been left on a windowsill in the humidity, the fibers loose and cool under my fingertip. The rest of the page was dry and crisp. Just that one line had taken on water that wasn't there, and the groove, the pressure line where his name should go, was deeper than I'd ever felt it. A real channel in the paper now waiting. I called Roy. I'd never called him in the night before. The phone rang twice, and he picked up wide awake, no sleep in his voice at all, like he'd been sitting up. And the first thing he said before I spoke was, "Is it after midnight?" I said, "Yeah." I said I forgot to write 28 in. There was a silence, not long, maybe 3 seconds. But in it I heard him breathe out slow, the way a man does when a thing he's dreaded for years finally comes, and he said, very calm, "Okay, lock the office, sit at the desk. Don't go down there, don't go near it, and don't open the door for anybody, not even me, till it's light. Doesn't matter what you hear, doesn't matter who you think it is." I said, "Roy, it's just a room, what is this?" And he said, in a voice I'll hear the rest of my life, "I don't know what it is, son. My dad didn't tell me what it is. He just told me what we do." A pause. "It's occupied tonight either way. The book only decides which one of us it counts." Then he hung up. "I can't give you all of the next 4 hours. Memory doesn't work cleanly when you're that scared. It skips and doubles. But I'll tell you what I'm sure of. I locked the office. I sat at the desk. The room went cold the way it had the first night, that freezer cold under the roar of the heater. The ice machine ran its cycle a little after one. Longer than usual, much longer, like the bin had filled and it just kept going. And around 1:30 the lot monitor showed the light come on in room 28, the warm yellow line under the curtain, the moving shadow. But this time the shadow stopped. At the window behind the curtain a tall narrow shape, and it stayed. And I had the certainty you feel in your stomach before your mind catches up that it was facing the camera, that it was facing me, that whatever it was knew the line in the book was blank and was working out what that meant. I looked at the recorder, red light on, taping. Then the office phone rang. I didn't answer it. The card hadn't mentioned the phone, but Roy had said don't open the door for anybody. And I extended that in my mind to the phone. I just decided no. It rang 9 times and stopped, rang again, stopped. The third time, I made the mistake of looking at the little caller ID box, and the number showing was the motel's own front desk line. The phone on the desk in front of me was calling the phone on the desk in front of me. I watched my own extension light up on my own line. I did not pick it up. I sat with my hands flat on the counter and counted my breathing, and after the 11th ring it stopped, and did not ring again. I don't know exactly when the light in 28 went off, before 3. The shadow at the window was just gone between one glance and the next. I never saw it move away. Around 4, the hour my body still keeps, I heard from somewhere out in the lot the sound of an ice scoop digging into a bin and being set down on the metal lip. 1 scoop. Then nothing. Then it was getting light. Roy's truck pulled in at 6:15, before brandy, which he never did. He came in gray, older than I'd ever seen him, and didn't say good morning. He went to the register and looked at the blank line and let out that same slow breath. Then he took the pen and wrote it himself. L. Maddox, room 28. He dated it the night before, and I watched his old hand catch on the name, scratch and drag the same way mine did, into the same deep groove. He looked at me and said, "You did right. You called and you stayed put. Most don't." And I finally lost the patience I'd been holding for 2 months. And I said, "What is it, Roy? Who is Maddox? What were you scared was going to happen to me?" He sat down in the office chair like his legs had given out, and he told me what he had, which I've come to understand was never the whole thing. He didn't have the whole thing. Nobody who ever held this had more than a piece. He said his father built the Larkspur in 1961. He said a man named Leland Maddox checked into room 28 that first year, paid cash for a long stay, and that something happened in the room. Roy didn't know what. Said his father never said. Said his father went to his grave not saying. And Roy didn't seem angry about it, just tired, like a man who'd long ago stopped expecting the part of the answer that mattered. "I don't know if Maddox was even a real man," Roy said. He was looking at the ledger, not at me. Dad talked about him 3 different ways, and I never got him to settle on one. Sometimes it was a guest who died in there. Sometimes it was just the name we found already written in the first book before we'd rented a single room. Like the building came with it. Dad used to say it the way you'd talk about a lien on a property. Something that was on the place when he bought it and couldn't be paid off. He shook his head. I stopped trying to make it one thing. It's not a haunting. A haunting you can clear out. This is more like the room's leased to a name, and the lease doesn't expire, and the book is how the name keeps the room. That's all I know how to do. Keep the book showing it's his. I don't know what he is. I know what happens when the line's blank. I asked what happens, and Roy said, and this is as far as he'd go. This is the edge of everything he had. The line has to have a name on it. Before midnight, his name. Last night it didn't. So last night the room went looking for a name to put on it instead. That's why you don't go down. That's why you don't answer. It'll take whatever name's closest. He looked at me. Last night, son, the closest name to that room was yours. I don't know how much of that is true, and I want to say so plainly. Roy was an old man passing on a thing his father half told him, and old men and half-told things do what they do to the truth. But I'll tell you what made me stop being able to call it a story. and it's a small thing, and it stayed with me longest. After that night, I went through the old employment records Roy kept in a box in the back, decades of night clerks every W-2, and I matched the names to the ledger. The hand that wrote Maddox on any given night usually matched the clerk on duty. That made sense. Each of us wrote it our own way. But every so often, scattered across the years, there'd be a stretch of nights where Maddox was written in a hand that matched no employee on the books. A new hand out of nowhere, and shortly after that new hand first showed up, one of the regular clerks would just stop being in the records. No termination, no last check, gone from the box like they were never hired. And the new hand would settle in and become one of the regular hands for a while, until it too went quiet and another new one arrived. I counted 9, conservatively, across the life of the place. 9 handwritings that arrived from nowhere. 9 clerks who stop existing on paper around the same time. The book taking them. New hands learning the old name. And the last thing I noticed, the thing I checked over and over the way I'd checked that tape, hoping to be wrong. My own writing, the way I formed El Maddox, and by the end I'd written it a few hundred times, had been changing, slowly. It had started to lean toward the oldest hand in the book. The careful old cursive from the first page, 1961, the original. The longer I wrote his name, the more my hand wrote it like he did. The pen stopped catching on it too, somewhere in those last weeks. It stopped dragging, it started to flow. Like the groove in my hand had finally agreed. I quit a few weeks after that. I didn't make a scene. I told Roy I'd found day work, which was a lie, and he didn't argue. Just looked at me with something between relief and pity, and said the last thing he ever said to me, "I'll cover 28 myself till I find somebody. It's easier than you'd think to find somebody. Lonely men come down that highway all the time." The Larkspur closed 2 years later. I heard Roy died and Pat couldn't run it alone. I drove out there once after. The sign was dark, even the pedals, the lot cracked and empty, and I sat in my truck across the road for a long time, and I'll be honest about what I was doing. I was watching room 28, watching the window, because I needed to know whether the light still came on at midnight in a closed-down motel, that nobody was writing in any book anymore. I left before midnight. I want you to know I was strong enough to leave, but I've thought about that decision every night since. In the hours my body still keeps, 10:45 to a little after 4. Because here's where it sits now. The book is closed. There's no line left for the name to hold, no record keeping the room his. And I keep thinking about where a name goes when the book that held it is gone. When the room is gone, when there's nothing left to be occupied except whatever still keeps the hours. I keep thinking about how the longer I wrote it, the more my hand became his hand had, and how the catch at the pen went away at the end, and what it means that it stopped fighting me. Every so often, signing something ordinary, a check, a delivery slip, my own name on a form at the counter, my hand starts the wrong letters, an L where there shouldn't be one, an old-fashioned loop I never learned, and the pen catches, drags, scratches, the way it used to only ever do on his name, and I stop, and I make myself write my own name slow and careful, the way you'd teach a child. Last week it caught on the first letter of my own first name, right at the start, before I'd even gotten to the part where it usually goes wrong. So far when I finish it, the name is still mine. That's all I can tell you. So far when I finish it, it's still mine.